A stronger day, be your best every day. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. I aim to help you stay healthy, be happier, and deal with challenges with greater resilience. What are some misleading beliefs and treatments about post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD? How can forgiveness help to foster PTSD healing and recovery? Today, you will meet Dr. Deb Lind from America. Deb will show you how to engage in forgiveness to transform traumatic stress into triumphant strength. Thank you. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. Thank you for watching Strength Optimizer, the Size Up Your Wellbeing series. Today we have Dr. Deb Lin joining us, and she lives in Minnesota. Deb is an Amazon best-selling author, award-winning scholar practitioner, and founder of the global Twitter chat #PTSD and Beyond, and the podcast PTSD and Beyond, which we both launched to provide advocacy, support, and resources, as well as hope, inspirations, educations, empowerment, and growth to everyone affected and with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. I'm so grateful to have you today joining us. Deb, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Well, thank you for taking the time to share with us your passions and expertise in PTSD, particularly the role of forgiveness in PTSD healing and recovery. But before we dive into that, understand that you wear many hats, and among the many titles that you have, you are also what we call a trauma warrior. Can you tell us a bit more in terms of the story behind the trauma warrior?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate coming on and being able to share the story. One of the things that I find fascinating about when we do share our story, it helps us, meaning sharing our story helps us with our own recovery. And in the beginning, I had reluctancy on sharing my story because I had what some folks are familiar with the term imposter syndrome, right? Where this Amazon bestselling author, we're an award-winning scholar practitioner. So it means that, the perception is that we really have ourselves put together here.
Yeah.
And I was challenged by one of my mentors to share more about my why. Like, why did you get into this? And why did you move from leadership development and strategy consulting to trauma recovery and stress management, mindfulness, and trauma-informed skill-based training? How did you make that transition? So he kept saying, you really need to share your story. And so I was presenting at the state of Minnesota. It was in the summer. And I did a session on trauma recovery through story-based sharing and telling. And I shared a little bit about my story of being a person who comes from a mindset of a warrior, which is different than a survivor. I feel that there's a perception of surviving as, I have a life jacket and my head's just above water, right? I'm surviving. I'm going through the stages of life. I'm going through the motions of life. When we move from the mindset and the perception, as well as the living from a warrior, our mindset is that I've done more than surviving, and I've done more than thriving. Now, in addition to surviving and thriving for myself, I'm breaking cycles as well as building legacies and role modeling for others, whether it's my kids or people that I interact with, other people that are at different places in their recovery. But being a survivor, warrior, and a person with lived experience and sharing your story, it is to continue to help myself as well as to inspire others, to role model the possibility for others and instill hope. So a warrior instills hope.
Absolutely.
And they role model hope and possibility for others.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, you put it in such a way that sometimes whatever title that we have, or sometimes maybe even the different labor that people give to us. For example, as you mentioned earlier, the best-selling author, scholar practitioners, And immediately it seems that it can potentially create a gap between, us and the participants or people who are listening or watching. And you're right, having a lived experience and moving from being a survivor to a warrior, it just makes us again human. Once again, that
Right.
no matter how many PhD you get, no matter how many life experience you have, at the end of the day, we are still humans. And having that, I guess, that humility to share the experience and the life story obviously takes a lot of courage. I also like your analogy of moving from being a survivor to a warrior, because once again, I guess that it's not just about putting on the life jacket, but warrior will be quick swimming across the oceans despite the currents against him or her. And when you talk about warrior, immediately you talk about going for a quest. A warrior by nature is going for a quest, and we know that during the quest is going to be, for example, I don't know, dark valleys that you need to go through, the mountains you climb up, and giants that you slay, and then the treasures that you discover. But yet at the same time, warrior also doesn't mean that you're going to win the battle all the time.
Right.
Sometimes you get defeated, but yet at the same time, because of the warrior mindset, you say that, hey, defeat means that there's also part of the learning process of me, of what we call the failing forward.
Right.
I keep
Correct.
going up, and that's what, through your stories, through what you're doing, inspiring hope for a lot of people. So thank you for highlighting that. Okay, apart from that, since we're talking about PTSD, can you tell us what are some of the popular but misleading beliefs and treatments about PTSD?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things about a misconception with post-traumatic stress, I'm going to call them ways of recovery, is that there's one size fits all. So it's complex to initially understand, because we do hear success stories, right? And so what happens is sometimes people will say, I want to try that modality because it's worked for somebody else, which is great, right? You look at lived experience, and what works for somebody might work for another person, which is true. It can work for somebody else. Where it becomes tricky is sometimes there's an expectation that one way of doing something is going to work for people. And when it doesn't happen, then there's a disappointment and a letdown that it doesn't happen. So for people with post-traumatic stress, there can be this cycle of, why didn't it work for me? It worked for somebody else. Why didn't it work for me? There are things that work for other people that don't work for me. For example, the things that I have done, especially when I was working on my doctorate, I used myself as the guinea pig, the experiment, the scientist, the practitioner, the patient, the researcher. I put myself on that role because I wanted to find out what I could do for myself that was natural. See, when I was talking to my doctor, I was in his exam room for a short period of time. And while I was talking, they were already writing out a prescription. I have a history of having challenges with prescription medication. And so while he's talking to me, I'm talking, he's writing a script, not listening, which, right there, I'm like, okay, come on, could you just listen to me? I was also on my phone looking at what was the history of treatment for post-traumatic stress. And at that time, it was over 100 years. And so I had said, there's over 100 years of research. And I'm in a doc program, so I knew what that meant, which was to add to the body of knowledge. It wasn't replicating something, it was adding new knowledge, right? And so I said, there's over 100 years. Within 100 years, I have no idea how many people earned their doctorate specifically in this area, whether you're looking at an MD, a PhD, a PsyD, an EDD, right? Master's level. Masters can replicate something, but doctoral level, to earn that education and that level of credential. And yet that's where we were at. Hand me a prescription and give me a referral to a psychotherapist. And I was just like, yeah, no, we're not doing this, because I can't go down that road. I had 2 kids and young in strollers, right? I was, a doc candidate with a double stroller. And I'm like, you want to give me a prescription that has And I asked, so what kind of side effects does this have? And it just, I was like, no, there's got to be another way. How many different recipes for chocolate chip cookies are there? Right. And I'm not saying that medication isn't good. What I am saying is that we need to be advocates for ourselves with the type of treatments that we get, because if we don't advocate for ourselves and understand and do the research, and we just go with what somebody tells us, and it doesn't work, the responsibility is shared and the end decision is ours. So when we become empowered with being our own advocate and saying, what else is out there? So for example, getting back to, the original question about, misconceptions. One is that there's one solution for everything. Another misconception is that people get frustrated when they do find something that works today, that maybe tomorrow or 2 weeks down the road it doesn't, or maybe something that does not work today, and 2 weeks down the road it does. So what I like to say to folks, and especially listeners right now, is identify 3 go-tos. So one that's a predominant thing that works, meaning works is defined as it gets the result that you're looking for. Okay. Provides maybe safety, security. It helps that fight, flight, freeze response. It's effective with, moving from reaction to response. It's effective with decreasing rumination, hypervigilance, whatever the area of focus is, it helps in that area. So that's your predominant, right? Your primary go-to. And then you have 2 backups, because sometimes our predominant is going to have a wonky day. and you got to have 2 other things that can work, that have had effects, positive effects. And maybe there might be something that, I can't find something, so I'm going to try this one other thing. And then you use it when you have the opportunity. But I think misconceptions are that one size fits all, that what people need to realize that it's personalized and individualized. We can learn from other people, which is great. And I think the other misconception is that post-traumatic stress is something that's relatable and that rests in, say, military, fire service, law enforcement. And post-traumatic stress can be experienced from any trauma event, whether it's a long-term trauma, so it's sequential, or it's situational. That can be from domestic violence, child abuse, something that somebody saw, whether it's, politically driven, for example, or, a 9/11 situation, Boston bombing. There are secondary trauma. So if you're working in the field as a social worker or psychologist, and you're hearing something from a client, and you can experience secondary trauma, or somebody could hear a story and it could be traumatic for them to hear or see that on television. So those are some of the misconceptions that are out there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I do like, we had once again, there's no one size fits all kind of approach, because once again, we're all different. At many levels, we're similar, but yet we're also different. And I think that if I do hear you correctly, and Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not saying that, don't go to see psychiatrist or medical doctor or take medication. You just need to understand, again, what is your area of focus, but also be your own advocate, in the sense that if anything that you're not sure, anything that you're not clear, once again, work directly with your clinicians, whether it's a doctor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, a therapist, and have an open communications, rather than putting your hope, or so to speak, all the eggs into one basket, and continue to educate yourself. Whatever is out there, whatever is working. Is that what you have been telling us?
Yep. It's an and situation. It's the solution for recovery is and. So it's collaboration. So it's working with, whether you're working with a dietitian and a nutritionist, along with and your psychotherapist, or maybe you're seeing a physical occupational therapist and seeing a psychiatrist. It's an and. So one of the things that I'd like to see more of with our practitioner base is collaboration, is and. Because what I'm seeing right now is there's too much division. Even on social media, there are people who are just, oh, I'm out there, I'm in people's faces because I'm pro medication, I'm pro pharmaceutical. That's fine because it works for that person or or people who say I do see positive results. At the same time, there's a whole group of people in my practice experience also that are saying, I want to get off this crap because the side effects, and nobody told me this, and nobody told me that, and nobody told me. It's an and solution. And right now there's too many divisions of the differences as opposed to the commonalities. Another way to look at this is in the PTSD and beyond community, we have folks within our community that acquired post-traumatic stress in many different ways. So child abuse, domestic violence, fire service, military, law enforcement, Boston bombing, so many different ways. And what brings us together and what unites us is our symptoms and our struggles, as well as our successes. Very rarely do we dive deep into the story of the detail, because what we have found is, yes, the detail will help somebody else of similar, like my experience with, surviving narcissistic child abuse will automatically bring down another person's barriers and have them be more open to participate in our community because of like attracts like. And at the same time, we communicate and share that we have people in all different areas in our community that you can learn from, because somebody in the military might say, for example, well, you know what, Dr. Deb, I had no idea that still at nighttime, you can relate to what it means of having insomnia. So what do you do to help yourself? They're not saying, well, you're not of military, you're not a vet, how could you understand? When you do share your story of some of the things that you struggle with, it opens up those doors and it brings down those barriers.
Again, we talk about what unites the PTSD community is through the struggles, okay, but yet at the same time, the struggle, the symptoms, I'm just thinking about the letters that begin with the S as well, but yet at the same time, okay, I also see there's going to be a lot of strength, and therefore there's a lot of success as well, and that's again through a community who's really open in sharing their vulnerabilities, being courageous, and also being curious of understanding that the end concept, A and end concept, rather than is the idol or kind of solutions.
Right. And that's a different way. It's a different way of practice, because historically and traditionally in the West, it's been quantifiable data, which you can quantify qualitative data. I mean, Creswell shows us how to do that. In practice, do people do it? No. But you can do it. And what we like to believe is, again, we meet people with where they're at. There's a video on my YouTube channel that was done years ago to show what do I do when I'm working through a trigger, right? And I just recently did another podcast episode where I talked about being there and being here. So back then is where I was at. And for somebody else, that's someone else's present. That's someone else's present. For another person, it's actually someone else's former. And what's really cool about that is, meaning the awareness of the present and the past and the former, is that we're aware of where we're at in the present moment with our recovery, and we meet other people with where they're at. So we don't, we're able to then, because of the documentation, to show people that, hey, you know what, if you're here, that's okay too, because guess what? We were all there. Nobody starts out of life being an Olympic swimmer, and no one starts out as, oh, hey, guess what? I'm this amazing chef. I mean, it takes some practice. It takes commitment. It takes recognizing mistakes. It means understanding that even through mistakes, you learn stuff. And through successes, you're learning stuff. But we meet people with where they're at. And those are ways of how that looks like. Because sometimes I think you touched on the vulnerability component and the courage. I wasn't always like that. If it wasn't for my mentor saying, listen, you know what, at some point, you're going to have to share this story. And then, of course, he said, oh, you're speaking to the state of Minnesota. Why don't you go ahead and do it then? And I was there for 2 days. And he's like, come on, you got to do it. And I thought, oh, these people are just going to, and that first time sharing my story, when I was finished with that presentation, I did not know if the audience was thinking, what did I sign up for? Or if they thought, wow, because it was complete silence.
Yeah.
And for me, it felt like a pregnant pause of, wow, this is a really long silent period. Maybe I should just, get my stuff and leave.
Yeah.
And there was that silence, and I'm standing there, and then there was the applause, and then there was this standing ovation. And I was like, oh my God, I was so emotional.
Yeah.
I was so emotional because, honest to goodness, I was standing there thinking, okay, this is odd. Nothing's happening. Okay. I will never do this again. Right.
Yeah.
And then there was a few claps, and then people were standing and clapping, the standing ovation, staying late afterward, and having people, share their story. I think that's the beauty of it too, is that when someone else sees somebody sharing their story and talking about even struggles, whatever piece it is that they're willing to come forward, it allows that connectivity of community and people. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're all people. We might live in different places of the world. You're in Australia. I'm in the United States. There are people all over the world who listen to your podcast. There's somebody right now that's sitting there probably thinking, you know what? I wish I could get there. There's another person who's thinking, you know what? I'm going to go test it out. There's another person who's probably thinking, you know what? I can't do this right now. And there's probably another person that's going, yeah, rock on. You know what? I remember the first time, and you know what? I feel so empowered, and I'm right there. I'm volunteering. I'm doing what I can for mental health advocacy, for peer support, and we're all doing it. We're all doing it in some way or fashion.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And what I'd like to see is that a lot of this so-called podcasting or sharing the story is a way of sowing the seeds.
Right.
The seeds fall into different types of grounds. Some are ready to blossom and bear fruit. Some may stay buried, not dead, but buried under the ground for a period of time. And the right condition come, the right people coming a long way, and then there will be going to be an aha moment. So just being the farmer here, so to speak, sowing the seeds. Yeah, and you're part of the seeds there too. There.
Yeah.
Talking about
saying beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing I noticed about you is that you're also a strong advocate of forgiveness, in the sense that forgiveness as part of PTSD, healing, recovery, and growth. So once again, what is forgiveness and what is not forgiveness? And why does it matter so much?
Those are all great questions. I think we could probably do an entire episode on forgiveness. Forgiveness can inflame a reaction from someone, as well as it can bring peace and comfort to somebody else. Why forgiveness can inflame a reaction is the meaning forgiveness and the socially constructed definition of forgiveness, I believe, is different than what people recovering from trauma believe in. Because the social definition, right? We hear things like forgiveness isn't for the other person, forgiveness is for yourself. But the social definition of forgiveness is accept what happened. And that accept what happened has an underlying connotation of what somebody else did or the situation, the event. It is what it is, and you have to accept and move on. There's an undertone of that message which invalidates someone's experience. So I want people to understand, who are listening right now, I do not subscribe to that definition of forgiveness. What forgiveness means for me, and what I believe forgiveness is, I believe forgiveness is where you go through the grieving process and you grieve for what happened, what shouldn't have happened, what could have been, and yourself. And forgiveness is about peace. Forgiveness is about inner peace and growing. Because with every horrible situation, you can look at Minnesota's a big farming state. Okay. There's a lot of agriculture here. And if we didn't have the farmers, not me, I don't farm, but anyway, if the farmers didn't have fertilizer, which we all know what fertilizer is made from, okay, then things wouldn't grow. If Patty Wetterling, unfortunately, didn't lose her son, Jacob, she wouldn't have created a nonprofit for missing children. And we wouldn't have the advocacy of Patty Wetterling and John Walsh. We wouldn't have mothers against drunk driving. From every tragedy, there's always something that grows out of it. I didn't think, I'll tell you right now, if somebody would have told me as a 16-year-old kid surviving that car crash that, hey, you know what, one of these days you're going to create a nonprofit, a podcast, and a global chat, and you're going to be doing all this advocacy work. You're going to be helping hundreds of thousands of people. I would have said, you're crazy. I would have said, there's no way that's going to happen. Not for me. Right. Mm-hmm. So forgiveness is about finding peace for yourself and growth. Now you can't do it's not linear either. So it's not like, I find peace and then I jump to growth. Yeah. It's like a doorknob. It opens and it closes. It opens and it closes. It has movement and it also has moments of pausing, right? So when your hand's off the doorknob, it's paused. When you move the doorknob to the right or to the left or the handle up and down, depending on what kind of doorknob you've got. But forgiveness is about finding peace for yourself. There's a grieving process. Acceptance is, like I said, it's not about the socially constructed definition. We validate ourselves, we validate things, we validate our feelings, we validate our thoughts, we validate our anger. We validate all of those components. And when we do, then we're at a place of peace. Now, is that a sustainable place? Yes, to a degree, because there will always be things we're going to continue to work on. So we're not always going to be at that homeostasis of peace and calmness. There's going to be other layers of, wow, I really need to forgive this piece. And sometimes the forgiveness is about, I need to forgive myself. So like with the work that I've done, I can say that I forgive my biological mom for not doing the work for herself, for her inner child, for her pains, and making the decisions that she did to impose abuse. I would have liked to have seen something different, because then she could have been the cycle breaker and the legacy builder. And those are her choices. So what I forgive is that I forgive those decisions that she made, because they were hurtful to other people as well as to herself. For myself, I forgive myself. And this took me years to get to this point, to forgive myself, to not be what I thought I needed to be, because if I was different, then all of those things wouldn't have happened. And there are other layers that go deeper to that, but in a summary, so you forgive yourself. So like, for example, a person who maybe is a domestic violence survivor, or say a sexual assault survivor, I've heard people say things like, I had to get to a point to forgive myself that I couldn't have, fought off the offender. I was just physically not possible. And you get to a point of where you do forgive yourself for things that you imposed expectations that you couldn't do. I couldn't do a lot of these things as a child. There's just no way you can. You as a child, you can't fight off someone who's bigger than you or stronger than you, or even as I'm only 5'2". So there are things that, I needed to come to terms with myself to forgive myself of having these expectations. So forgiveness is multi-layered. Yeah. In its essence, it's about peace. It's about an inner peace.
I do appreciate you giving us such a succinct explanations, because I totally agree with you that can spend under 1 to even 10 podcasts talking about the different layers of forgiveness. But sounds like forgiveness is an active and ongoing intentional process of back and forth, back and forth.
Yes.
It's like I imagine like it's like a oscillations from one end to the other end,
Right.
back again to the other end. Yeah,
That's beautiful.
right. Wonderful. So at a practical level, like what are some of the practical things that people can do or we can do to start the quest of forgiveness?
I think, excuse me, I think that one of the things that people can do is to write down things that are troubling. They can write down things that used to be troubling, and they can write down things that they're proud of. So we have three
Okay.
different categories: things that still struggle, things that used to struggle, and things that they're proud of.
Mhm.
And in the process of writing things down, so there's a difference when we process information, when we actually take a lead pencil
Mhm.
and write on a piece of paper
Yeah.
in an area where it's quiet and you can hear the lead on the piece of paper, the act of writing. I mean, science has showed us that when we do that action, we process information at a heightened cognitive level.
Mm.
Things can move through. So we're talking about neuroscience and processing information and having things move from one side of the brain to the other side of the brain, where we can process and we can, I want to say, let go and be free of, but it allows a sense of freedom. There's a sense, I wish I could talk about and define it and speak about it more clearly, but a person will be able to notice the difference in the change.
Yeah.
Other things that they can do. I have a coloring book actually that people can process exactly what we're talking about here. And it's 5 questions. So you answer one question at a time, and then you color a mandala while you're thinking about that question that you've just responded to. And there's a pre and a post. So it's assess yourself, your mental state, your emotional state, your physical state, and your energy state before you do this whole coloring book. And it's called My Story. And that is a way of helping people with processing forgiveness or a challenge. So there's a couple things that people can do. And the third thing that someone else can do is you can work on this within a community. So you can take a class and you can work on forgiveness. You can do a workshop. You can work on it with a peer support group. We have things like this at PTSD and Beyond, where people will say, I want to understand more about myself. You can also read. I mean, we can look at shadow work. And why it's important to look at shadow work is because it's very rarely talked about. I mean, if you look at Dr. Wong and his work with suffering, it reminds me of appreciative inquiry, right? So we always want to talk about like the things that are great and wonderful, where that becomes where I would call not balanced thinking. And I like to do mixed method stuff, right? So because it gives us a complete picture. If I only focus on the stuff that's great, but I ignore and I shove away the stuff that's, the icky, sticky, tricky stuff, eventually that icky, tricky stuff is going to like emerge. It's going to just be like a volcano for some folks. Excuse me. And when we do address it, though, we have a balanced picture of our complete self, right? So maybe there's some stuff that we realize, like, where did I come up with that belief? Why do I think that way? Where did I get that from? Who taught that to me, right? And then the realization is, you know what? I am an adult and I really don't believe in that. So why am I holding on to it? Okay, yeah, it's a tradition, for example. Maybe it's a tradition in the family, but it's not something that I subscribe to. I can change it. I can let it go. And then there's all kinds of rituals and practices that you can do, like letting go things. You can write things down, you can tear it up, you can recycle it, you can, put it in your bonfire, your fireplace. There's all kinds of things that we can do. So one, we can write down the 3 things. What are current areas that are troubling, things that are not troubling, things that used to be that I'm really proud of myself. I can enroll in a class or a workshop with some group, trusted community.
Yeah.
I can also get the coloring book if they want to. You can do journaling. There's so many different ways that we can start looking at what is forgiveness for us. How can we move through it? And then how can we grow from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, it starts with not just a single decision, a single choice. It's an ongoing decision. Yes, today I choose to give it. Today I choose to, or whatever, if you in the blanks. Understanding sometimes when we say I choose to, at emotional level, I may not want to. I don't feel like doing it. All right. Okay, that is the frustration.
Right. I don't feel like doing it. Every day looks different. I think that's something else to let listeners know, is that every day looks different. So when you're having a really good day, that's a day to write down the stuff that you're like, you know what, I'm really super proud of myself on this.
Yeah.
Because when you're having not so great of a day, then you want to go back and you can look at that journal or piece of paper and say, yeah, you know what? I remember how I felt on that day when I did great, when I felt like I was doing great. The other thing I want people to know is every day is a great day. Every day that we are on the right, meaning the top side of the dirt, that's a good day. We might have days where it's like, I don't want to get out of bed. Why do I have to think about this? Why is this happening to me again? Why am I thinking about this stuff? And it's okay, because every day looks different. What I want people to take away from too is, no matter if you're crawling, no matter if you feel like that you are crawling, you're still moving forward. And no matter if you took 2 steps backward, guess what? Tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow is another day.
And I'm also a big fan of connections in community, because sometimes, like, again, we're talking about just the generalizations of the Western psychology approach that, me is the center of the universe, that therefore me should be able to do this or fix this, forgetting that they are always community, they're always friends and family and beyond, that are more than happy to go through perhaps sometimes that the pain, the frustration, that anxiety with us. So I'm always saying that, if you realize, notice, hey, I can't do this on my own or yourself, that itself is a great aha moment. It's a great realization. And hopefully that will so-called give us the courage and the humility to reach out to someone else.
Right. I think that's a great point to touch on too, because right now, especially in trauma and, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, mental health world, if you will, on social media, there are folks that will talk about community, which is wonderful, because community is what unites us, right? I mean, we're one people, one planet. We're a guest here. We live among so many other species, right? And yet human beings control what actually happens here, which affects all other species. And the community component, I saw something recently that made me really sad. I felt really sad about it, because what made me sad was somebody was reaching out for assistance on social media. And I don't know if this person was just having a bad day or what, but the comment was about, I don't have time for you. And I thought, here's a person who probably took them so much, right, courage and vulnerability to say, I need some help. And it was like, if you can't send me an email, I don't have time to talk to you. And it's like, you know what? In our community, in PTSD and beyond, we have people all over the world, for one thing, who monitor that account on Twitter specifically. And people are surprised when they DM me that it's me. It's like, of course it's me. No, I mean, we have a team of people, but yeah, it's me, and I always say, if I'm up and I'm able to help you, we're here to help you. I've been on the phone with people 12:30 in the morning talking to people. There have been people where if I can't sleep and I'm up and somebody's message and they need assistance, we can refer people to, community lines. We can also, talk with people directly. And why I'm saying this is because community means we're available to help our fellow humans when they need it. Because psychotherapy is wonderful. Psychologists are wonderful. Psychiatrists are wonderful. Not all, I'm speaking in general, okay? If it's a Saturday afternoon and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you need help, where are you going to go? We need to rely on one another. We've got to be there for one another. What if it's 2 o'clock in the morning in England? Who are they going to contact? You know what they're going to do? They're going to contact somebody in America because we're awake. If it's 8 o'clock in Australia, right? You can connect with somebody else there, but what happens when it's later? That's the beauty of the world is there's always somebody awake. There's always somebody up. There's always somebody who will say, how can I support you right now? Do you need a listening ear? Are you looking for solutions? Do you just want to talk?
Yeah.
What is it that you need? And most people just want to be heard. They want to feel that someone's listened to them. They want to feel that someone's validated their feelings and their thoughts. They just want somebody being present. So like when I'm on the phone with somebody, I'm not like, Googling something else or looking online for holiday. I mean, we are fully present with each other. And I think that's what brings community and builds community is we're fully present with each other.
Thank you for that. Look, I only have one last question for you, Deb, and it got nothing to do about PTSD, but more of at a personal level. Like, what is one thing that you have been doing this week to look after your well-being?
You know what? This week has been something else. Let me just tell you. I'm laughing because it has been a week that I've been like, okay, what is going on? The thing that I've done the most for myself this week is I have honored the promise that I made to myself when I was 16 years old. There have been communication situations that have been in the past triggering is an understatement. Hurtful, challenging, brings up a lot of old stuff. And so for me this week, what I've done is I've kept that commitment and that promise to that 16-year-old girl, because that's when I made the promise to myself that I would never be like that, it stopped the drama, the abuse, everything stops with me. So how that links to other people is if you can't, I say this a lot. I say this phrase a lot. If you can't make a promise to yourself, who can you make a promise to? So what I would challenge people to do is to ask yourself, what's the promise that you can make to yourself that you can keep to yourself as it relates to your well-being, your recovery, your mental health, however you want to, label it. But for myself, that's what I've done is this week has been very challenging with communication. And each time I've needed to respond, I've said, okay, so I'm going to keep that promise to yourself, right? The other thing that I've done also is when I'm under a lot of stress where it's rooted in like traumatic stress, I drink hot water because I notice with my nervous system, I get cold. And so I drink hot water. It's hot water with lemon and raw honey, actually.
Yeah. Hot water and something else. Yeah.
Yes, those are two things. I mean, I'm a Greek American, so drinking water with lemon, fresh lemon, was always really common growing up. And so, but what I find is that the hot water helps keep me warm because I find that when I'm experiencing things that remind me of, past memories, right, that I get really cold. So those are two things. Those are two things that I've done for myself this week.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm afraid that that's all the time that we have for today. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, Deb. And for our listener out there, if you want to engage Deb's expertise in PTSD coaching, consulting, and speaking, I'm sure that you can contact her or reach her at her website, which is drdeblind.com. I repeat that again, that's drdeblind, LINDH.com. Well, thank you for watching. I'm Dimas from Strength Optimizers. We're here to bring out the best in you by optimizing your strengths. Have a fabulous day, everyone. Once again, thank you, Deb. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.